Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from Tynes. We're talking about the state of the SOAR market and what's coming up next for security orchestration and automation. My name is Matt Muller. I'm the field CISO here at Tynes. Prior to joining the organization, I spent the last decade building security programs, operationalizing them, and now as Tynes field CISO, I get to work with all of our customers on security and automation strategy. Today, I am joined by one of the experts in the SOAR market and very excited to be chatting with him today. I'm here with Andrew Green from GigaOm. Andrew, would you mind introducing yourself to the folks on the call?
Thank you very much, Matt, for having me. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Green. I'm a networking and security research analyst with GigaOm. I've been with them for about 5 years, 4 out of which I've been looking at the SOAR market, which is one of the funnest markets that I've been looking at. And besides some other security operations, tools that I'm looking at, like SIEM and so on, I think this one is the most exciting to talk about.
Awesome. I completely agree. And I think today is going to be a super fun conversation. And we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to be covering, an overview of the SOAR market itself and some of the different vendors that are out there, providing some opinions about the outlook and where we think the market might be going. And it's 2025. So of course we're talking about AI, right? And what it means for SOAR vendors and how to think about AI in automation. And last but not least, Andrew's going to be covering the GigaOm SOAR radar report as well. As a few housekeeping items, this webinar will be recorded. So, if you have a hard stop or have to jump to something else, not to worry. You'll get a full copy of this in your inbox following the webinar. And we want to hear from you. We accept questions in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. So if anything pops up as you're watching, questions, thoughts, opinions, we definitely want to hear those, and we'll address as many of them as we can as we walk through the webinar. So to kick things off, there's been a lot of conversation lately about SOAR as a technology category. And I think a lot of this discussion stemmed from a Gartner hype cycle for ITSM report that sort of put SOAR in what they call the trough of disillusionment. And this was picked up by a number of different folks, all of whom had a number of different reactions to this. And I think, one of the things that has been a little bit missed in some of this conversation is that the Gartner report really focused on some of the shortcomings of SOAR-specific technology, not necessarily SOAR as a concept, right, as a way of working. I think every security team is still very enthusiastic about automation, and even though there are maybe some valid issues with legacy SOAR platforms, the idea that people need to automate is certainly still very valid. And I think for us as we speak with customers and folks that are evaluating what's out on the market, a lot of the critiques of legacy SOAR platforms are very valid. We hear that folks have a real struggle deploying legacy SOAR platforms. They also find them hard to operationalize because they often involve either learning a programming language or some sort of domain-specific language. And that in turn makes it hard for folks outside of a small group of experts to be able to build automations. And those automations themselves are often fairly limited to predefined integrations, right? So I think these are all sort of very valid critiques of the legacy SOAR platforms and where the industry may have fallen a little bit short in the past. But Andrew, I would love to hear sort of your viewpoint on the overall SOAR market and what you're seeing out there.
Absolutely. So I've been very vocal against making SOAR obsolete. So Gartner, I think they're the ones that coined SOAR like 10 years ago or something like that. They also killed it. I think they've done that in favor of looking at automation through an AI perspective. I don't think that is the right approach, not at least from a maturity point of view. At least maybe in the future it would make sense. We also have a list of challenges associated with legacy SOARs. I am seeing very few tools nowadays that are active in the market that have those challenges, Tines being included. You're not going to have the issues with integrations or out of the box integrations or configuring them with Tines. It's just something that happened as the market was nascent, but today it's very unlikely that you're going to have those issues. So pinning those challenges on SOAR, I think it's inherently a wrong approach. Having that said, I think SOAR is, as I said, one of the most exciting spaces to look at, mainly because it's a natural place for AI to happen. And the reason for that is that you have your AI logic box, let's say, and then you can define automation logic before, after. And it's also a good place to host building AI agents and so on. You still need to have a framework where you can actually define what is going into the AI and what is coming out, implement your guardrails, make sure that you're not losing any data, outputs are sanitized and so on. So SOAR is very much still valid today. It's going to continue being valid, and it's a natural gateway into implementing AI into your environment.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think AI is a great supplement, and in the SOAR world, and not necessarily a solution for some of the problems that legacy vendors may have had, and that those need to be solved in other ways. I very much agree with that. And I think the world of SOAR and automation is fairly large. Andrew, as you evaluate all these different types of vendors, how are you seeing these things break down?
Right. So I've came up with those three categories a few years ago. I think this might have been like 2021 when I first started looking formally at the space. I think today they might have to change a bit, but generally speaking, you have the pure play SOAR vendors, which is essentially just standalone SOAR solutions. You've got a vendor that has a product, which is SOAR. You've got security players, like big companies, Fortinet, Palo Alto. Those usually either have acquired SOAR or have developed SOAR as part in their wider portfolio. And then you've got cross-portfolio players, which are vendors that offer more solutions than just security automation. And in here, I want to talk about Tines a bit, because initially when I started looking at the tool, it would fall mainly into the pure play SOAR category. But now as Tines has evolved and started making some non-security automation features, they would more qualify into the cross-portfolio player. I don't want to spend too much time in putting vendors in buckets, but generally speaking, if you are going to buy a SOAR solution, it's going to be from one of those three vendors, each of them having some strengths and weaknesses. For example, with the wider security players, you can have access to a broader portfolio. Cross-portfolio players, you can have access to ITSM features and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it is interesting for Tines. We did, I think, start more in the bucket of pure play SOAR, because our founders, came out of security operations, and, those were the pain points that they had to go solve. And, for a lot of the cross portfolio players, I think you mentioned, these are automation vendors that start to move maybe a little bit more into the security space. And we've almost done the opposite, right? Where we started really trying to solve security teams' problems. And then, IT teams started to look at the automation platform that Tines provided, and other, parts of the organization. And all of a sudden, it's cross portfolio because of the capabilities that it offers. And yeah, almost a reverse journey from, I think, what a lot of those folks do. And one of the things I think as well is that, I completely agree that, spending all of our time trying to bucket companies into one of these three is maybe not the most useful exercise, but I do think it's valuable for understanding some of the implications of what choosing those various options mean, right? Like, if you choose pure play SOAR, it does mean, I think, that you're probably a little bit more focused on one part of your security team, versus a cross portfolio, which may be a little bit more useful to other teams in your organization. And ultimately, in my view, those decisions matter, right, as you're thinking about those different vendors. So that's a little bit of the SOAR world as it has existed in the past and how it exists today. Andrew, I'd love for you to sort of, start this one for us and share your outlook on, where the SOAR market is going and what you think is going to happen over, let's call it the next couple of years, maybe, next couple months, next couple of years, because I know these industries move pretty fast.
Absolutely. Well, as I initially said, SOAR is a very natural place to host AI in. Host as in, implementing your wider business logic. And I think the, stars aligned in the sense that as SOAR reached maturity and those challenges that Gartner, for example, issued about SOAR, they're no longer applicable, and you've got a very good mature platform that has comprehensive capabilities, which is exactly the type of solution that you want to host your AI in. So that is going to be the main focus. Again, I'm not precious about talking about AI with everything, but unfortunately, this is the case right now. And you might look at the industry and you'll see a bunch of standalone AI agent solutions or AI first companies and so on. And I wouldn't recommend at this stage going all in on AI just because we don't have the right tool set to make sure that we minimize hallucinations. We control the outputs and so on. Yes, you can implement RAG and implement LangChain and LangGraph and whatever, but it's still very much a guessing game until you hit production, and that's when everything really matters. So yeah, that's the biggest one that I have to comment on. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree. Right, we're especially with AI. We're still so early in figuring out where AI is most and least applicable for providing solutions for teams. I think the thing that everyone wants to avoid, I hope, is having a hammer, which means everything looks like a nail, right? And making sure that AI is appropriate for the use case that you want, and that there's like you mentioned, hallucinations and sanity checking that the output of your AI isn't something completely bonkers, right? Because AI will confidently provide a wrong answer just as confidently as it will provide a correct answer. And so having those guardrails in place and making sure that there's checks and balances make complete sense. One other thing that has sort of came to mind as we've been chatting is it almost feels like SOAR is becoming a bit more of a philosophy rather than a particular software platform. And I say that sort of with an analogy to DevOps, right? Where DevOps was maybe an approach that people took to deploying, applications and, moving faster and making sure that you didn't have this hand curated set of servers that were serving your production software. But now we see security teams adopting DevOps principles, and we see these notions sort of starting to be adopted outside of the core group of infrastructure people that started doing DevOps. Do you think that SOAR is trending in that direction as well, where maybe it's becoming a little bit more of a philosophical approach rather than something that's just a specific software platform?
So it is going to be a more of a philosophical approach, but I take a rear view point of view on that one. And I mean, when Gartner declared SOAR obsolete, everybody was trying to jump off the SOAR bandwagon, so they want to rebrand themselves as something else. But I think the term itself is going to stick around. I think in 5 years' time, we're still going to call SOAR whenever we have to deal with automation and response in a security context. But yeah, generally speaking, I think it's going to be a more philosophical approach. And funny you mentioned DevOps, because one of the things that I've been looking at with the SOAR radar is DevSecOps. So, for example, can you implement stuff like detection as code? Can you integrate with Jenkins, Git? Do you have version control systems and so on? Are those built in, or do you integrate with like third-party tools and so on? I think DevSecOps is one of the most important bits that you want to look at as a security operations team. mainly because you want to have that communication between the DevOps team and the security team. DevOps and security ops they both use the term ops, but they don't mean the same thing. Like when you do security operations, you handle day-to-day security. When you do DevOps, it means you both create and run an application. So yeah, DevSecOps, one of the most important things to look at when you're looking at SOAR or any kind of security automation tool.
Yeah, it almost seems like, I think on the detection side, it feels like detection engineering and detection as code is really starting to mature as well. And response as code, and it almost feels like it's lagging a little bit. And this is an opportunity for SOAR to start thinking about to the DevSecOps model and almost response as code model, be able to provide those capabilities, right? And make sure that those principles can be applied even in a more modern world where it's not necessarily a traditional tiered SOC model or things like that.
Yeah, the pipes are there for the response, especially in SOAR tools. It's just a matter of defining the methodology and how that should look like. And for detection, I actually noticed something that's quite funny. On the one hand, you have the detection as code people, which I really want, to write my detections in YAML. And on the other hand, you've got a bunch of tools that do no code in terms of we're just going to learn based on the data that we're ingesting, and then we're going to create alarms based on that. So you don't code that at all. It's like an ML first approach.
Yeah, and it almost feels like there's correlations there between the level of complexity that a team and organization can handle, and the type of solution that they're looking for. Where organizations that are fortunate enough to have a well-funded, large security organization are able to spend that time, whether it's in automation or whether it's in detection, really getting down into the nitty-gritty details and tuning it to be exactly what they want. And then you have the folks that are maybe on a little bit more of a shoestring budget, right, and have a very resource constrained approach, and they need simplicity, right? They need to be able to iterate very, very quickly, and they're willing to sacrifice maybe even a little bit of customizability, or willing to work out of the box a little bit more in order to get the same results done. And I think that's true for automation platforms as well, where it should be as customizable as you want it to be. And that's where I think legacy SOAR maybe aimed a little bit in the wrong direction, right? Where it was assuming that you would have the time and capability and expertise to do the exact tiny little bits of tuning that you wanted, but in reality, that just meant hiring more people and not necessarily saving time and resources and energy.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what happened. There's another box on this screen that I want to talk about. So
Yeah.
expansion of SOAR solutions beyond security. We briefly touched upon that when we talked about the cross-portfolio players. But what I've noticed, and I think this was just the last iteration of the report, when you do automation for security purposes, it's essentially baptism by fire. You can't afford to go wrong. So when you have the security pedigree, in terms of I've got validation in place. I can make sure that I've got the right sort of monitoring to make sure that if I'm going to block an account, it's not going to be a mistake, right?
Right.
And when you take all those lessons learned and you start applying them to other IT automation, then you've got a much stronger foundation to work on. On the other hand, you've got some tools that were doing IT automation that were being used for security automation just because the tool was already there. And at the end of the day, it's all just calling HTTP. But you might be lacking some of those features that actually make the solutions hardened, and you don't have enough visibility or enough validation over the automation process.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we've learned as teams beyond security start to use Tines is that when you build for a security use case and then expand, security has in a lot of ways the highest bar to hit when it comes to the platform's capabilities. Because security teams almost by definition need access to almost every single tool in the organization in order to be able to do things like perform incident response or perform investigations. And so the amount of access that the tool needs is pretty broad. And it's also, something where security has a bunch of these mission critical workflows where if you're in an incident, you need to know that your workflow will execute and properly isolate, the correct endpoint, and not the wrong endpoint, or not isolating the endpoint, and so forth. And so, and there's a lot of credentials, right, that the security team has that may be a little bit more privileged than the rest of the organization. And so when you combine all of these facts together, if you build a platform that the security team is able to use confidently, I think that makes it easier to allow other teams into the platform and say, like, yes, if this meets the security team's bar and requirements, yeah, it's totally fine if the IT org is in here, right? Versus coming from the other perspective where if you're trying to adapt, maybe a workflow or automation platform that wasn't necessarily built with security in mind, then there's a lot more constraints on either what you can put into the platform or what you can connect it to, and so on and so forth. I think the other, thing as well, when we start talking about, cross organization use cases, is that there's a bunch of economies of scale and network effects that you can get when everybody's using the same platform. For example, both IT and security might need to rotate a password on a user account, right? IT because maybe the end user forgot it, security because maybe they've discovered that credential in a data breach somewhere. But at the end of the day, changing a password is changing a password, right? And it doesn't matter really who builds that use case, both teams can now leverage it. And so I think, what we're starting to see, and, Andrew, I'd be curious to hear if this is something that you're seeing as well, is as teams start implementing these more unified approaches to automation where everyone's collaborating in the same platform, we do start seeing these network effects where IT and security, which I think can sometimes be a little bit at odds with each other, now see each other as allies in some of their automation journeys.
Yeah. And there are two main factors that dictate how successful that's going to be, and it's role-based access controls and multi-tenancy. And by that I mean, if you have a multi-tenant SOAR, it means that you can have processes isolated from each other. For example, if I'm a security team and I have my security workflows and I don't want anybody touching them, I don't want them to share resources with anybody, I don't want any data cross-contamination, I'm going to have that to run. I'll have to run that separately. On the other hand, if there are non-critical use cases like rotating a password, for example, they can run in the same tenant. And on top of that, it means you also must have a multi-tenant management platform. So that means that I don't have to log into different consoles or treat those differently, and I can just have like one pane of glass and have visibility over what's happening. Other than that, you've got role-based access controls, as in I don't want my IT teams to access some security operations and vice versa. And that is essentially just going to be a list of checkboxes where you allow or disallow something to happen, but the granularity and also integration within the wider environment that you're having is going to make a big difference in terms of how well you can implement those permissions.
Absolutely. And, what's interesting is all of these capabilities are not necessarily AI, right? Like these are all evolutions of what legacy SOAR means without even touching on the integration of AI, which means, should we talk about AI?
Sure. Why not? We haven't exhausted the topic yet.
I know. I feel like there's a little bit more to say here. And, I think the reality is everyone is trying to figure out how to add AI into, not even just in security, not even just in SOAR. Everyone's trying to figure out how to add AI into the platforms and solutions that they offer. And, I think what we're starting to see is some of the use cases around AI, particularly within SOAR and how security teams are using them, start to fall into a couple categories. The first being AI co-pilot style into implementations where maybe as an analyst you have something that's assisting you with crafting an AWS API call. We see AI being leveraged for triage of initial issues, and we also see one of the most common, I think, use cases around data, summarization and extraction, which I think is something, whether it's a threat intelligence use case or writing up an incident, retrospective document. These are often some of the most, time-consuming use cases for humans that AI really excels at. I think we've also seen some of the more ambitious AI implementations reach the edges of where AI can be helpful. And if you look at how large language models are trained and constructed, a lot of this makes sense, right? Where if you have a very well documented, well defined public data source, for example, the AWS documentation, just about every LLM can figure out how to leverage that, right, and assist you with using the AWS APIs. If you have an internal, home-built, undocumented, internal tools platform, AI may just hallucinate an API call, right, when your internal platform doesn't even necessarily have an API. And so we start to see, some of the limitations around the edges, where if something doesn't have a lot of data that's publicly accessible about it, or maybe you're unable to connect for RAG to your internal documentation sources, or if you're trying to get AI to do math, this is where some of the limitations come in. If you're asking AI to generate a risk score, this is something where you can go into most LLM providers and say, based on this data, what is the risk score on a scale of 1 to 10? And the AI may say it's a score of 8, score of 8, score of 7, score of 8, score of 9, score of 7, right? And you lose a little bit of that consistency when it comes to risk scoring. But I think in general, AI is absolutely making life easier for the relevant use cases for a lot of these teams. But Andrew, you've been looking at this market in depth for a while now. Would really love to get your thoughts on where things are at and where things are going.
Sure. I'll start off with an anecdote that I had last night. So I'm looking to use a new RFP tool. I logged into it. I didn't know how to create a new project. The thing wasn't documented. I asked the assistant that's built in the platform, how do I create a new project? The assistant said, well, it might be a new project or create project. You'll have to see. And then what's the point of having it if it's not going to give you something specific? Now, like proper implementation would have been, I'll create a new project for you, and then it creates a new project and opens it up for you, and then you can start populating it. Or perhaps you can tell it, can you populate it with whatever based on whatever, and it's going to say yes and do it. So I think that's it. There are two main ways of looking at AI in security. One is AI for security. The other one is security for AI. I think in times you've got those. You've got three flavors. Two of them I remember. You've got AI that can help you generate new workflows, and then you've got AI that can be used in incident response and, as you were mentioning, data analysis, summarization, and so on. So those are kind of two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, whenever you want to create a new workload that, let's say, it is not out of the box and you don't have time for it, you can just ask the AI, can I use it to look at suspicious traffic and then isolate the user, and it's going to create you a workflow that is going to get you most of the way there. It's likely not going to get you all of the way there, so you have to still do some manual work. And on the other hand, when you are responding to incidents, You can see, can you tell me which of those alerts is the most severe one that I can look at first? Or based on this whole set of logs, can you tell me if there is anything that's anomalous? And AI is very good at analyzing big chunks of data and perhaps unstructured data that it is very hard for an analyst to go through and parse manually. Now, my whole caveat with this thing is, and I've got experience in this writing, I don't know how confident I would be to put my name onto something that was generated by AI. And I think this is a struggle that most people would be going through, even though they don't explicitly state it. If I'm going to report to my manager that I have determined this is a false positive based on the output of AI, and it turns out not to be a false positive, whose fault is it? Where does accountability lie? And just like with self-driving cars, when you have like a Tesla having an accident, a lot of people argue that it should be the manufacturer's fault because they are the ones kind of driving it. But realistically, it's still going to be on the end user. I think this is still a gray area. It's important to have processes in place about this before starting your AI journey. And it goes for saying build time AI and response time AI. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I love AI as a almost like a first draft tool, right? Where, if I understand the alert and it's just time consuming for me to write up a summary, that feels like an okay thing maybe to put my name on, right? Where it's like I can read what the AI has output, I can understand if the AI has hallucinated, but like at the end of the day, I'm still the expert and it's still my decision. Whereas, if I'm having the AI fully do the work for me, and maybe I don't understand the output or I'm not able to sort of vet that it's not hallucinating, I get a little bit more uncomfortable there. At least personally. I'm curious, have you seen use cases for security teams where AI is acting as a decision maker and that feels comfortable? I mean, is the current generation of AI like smart enough to act as a decision maker, or is it still more of an assistant?
Well, I don't know, and I don't have the visibility into how people are using this day to day to comment on that.
Mm,
What I can say though is, uh, even though it might give you wrong information, and accountability lies to whoever the business decides it lies with, it might still be better than humans at processing hard to read data. So perhaps it might be Jim's fault because he went over what he went with what AI was saying, but at the same time, Jim might have read it and said, "This looks like a false positive."
mm,
Uh, so I wouldn't discard it completely. It is a tool at the moment. It's not autonomous at all.
right.
Um, so efforts at the moment should be around how can I make sure that the output is as correct as humanly possible. Because once you get to the human level, then you can, with more confidence, go with what the AI is saying. And it can be something as basic as I'm using two different models. If the models don't match, then there's something clearly wrong there, and somebody should investigate. If you're using two models and they match, it's more likely that it's going to be, an actual true false positive. True false positive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I really like how Anthropic describes some of their AI models and their documentation, which is they say treat Claude like a very very smart coworker who knows absolutely nothing about your environment. And when I start thinking in that model, I'm like, okay, this person's going to have a bunch of general knowledge, but I would still want something or someone overseeing what they do and providing input to them where appropriate, to make sure that they're able to come up with the best conclusions possible. And in a lot of ways, I think that mirrors how we've tried to implement AI in Tines. You mentioned a couple of different features that we have, and We offer the ability to, integrate AI into a deterministic workflow so that you kind of get the best of both worlds there, where, maybe the input data is sent to AI, sent to the AI model that is, connected to your private instance. And you can also have some steps afterwards to say, let's sanity check this output, right? Make sure that the AI is not hallucinating. We also offer Workbench, where you can have, direct interaction via more of a chat style model. But again, the decision making is ultimately up to you. And I think you're exactly right, Andrew, where as you start seeing the AI act comparably to a human, that's where it's, we're able to say, like, okay, this process we're comfortable, sending over to AI. But I think it's important, if you don't understand the process and you don't have a deep knowledge of how this process works, it's going to be really hard to say whether an AI will do it better than a human. So I think there's still definitely work for people to do in order to make sure that they're using AI with the right, guardrails. And yeah, I don't think AI is ready to just be completely let loose in any sort of autonomous way just yet. Great assistant, not necessarily I guess a great coworker, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like the definition for a consultant.
Exactly.
I do feel I jumped the horse a little bit, so I also want to make sure that besides letting AI loose, there are fewer less impactful tasks that you can outsource to AI, and that can be, for example, surface the right documentation. Show me the data that you believe is an anomaly, and I can have a look at that. Or provide something that points you in the right direction to help with investigation and threat hunting, rather than actually just going out and doing it. Providing reports on stuff, comparing two seemingly unrelated incidents to see whether there's something common. They might be sharing the same IP address. You might have missed it. AI is less likely to miss it than a human operator, and just using AI to kind of piece together data that would be otherwise hard to find.
Absolutely, I love those. Those are fantastic AI use cases. So maybe switching gears a little bit to tie all of this together. You all published the GigaOm radar for SOAR, and I would love to hear from you, Andrew. Some of the features you covered, and what the report is, and just a little bit more context about the GigaOm SOAR radar.
Sure, absolutely. So the GigaOm SOAR radar is a technical assessment. That means we don't look at stuff like revenue, market share, or anything like that. My personal opinion is that those are rear view metrics. Just because somebody is a big player doesn't mean they have the best technology. This is, I believe, aligned with the GigaOm ethos of doing technical assessments. So we define a set of functional and non-functional requirements. On the screen now, we have the functional requirements, and those are split into two. Key features, those that should be present in tools today. Emerging features, those that are going to become more and more important as time goes on, but not necessarily deal breakers, and not necessarily something that is mature. So for key features, you have stuff like threat enrichment. Can I correlate multiple pieces of information together? Can I call external threat intelligence? Case management and collaboration. Can I have tickets that I can collaborate with my workers, share details, have war rooms, that kind of stuff. Alert prioritization. So this is on the idea that SOAR ingests alarms from SIEM. SIEM might generate too many alarms. How can you make sense of them? Correlations and evolving threats. So, for example, can I have stuff like topological graphs of affected entities for every threat? Zero-day response. Let's say you have an unknown. What do you do about it? Validation and red teaming. So those are two kind of related ones. That's why I put them into one. Validation says, can I make sure that this workflow operates as intended? And red teaming is, can I feed a benign, let's say, malware through the workflow and see how it behaves? And then contextual risk-based scoring essentially says, based on all the data that we have, both external and internal, what is going to be like the priority of this threat. So those are key features. We expect all tools today to have them to some degree. And then emerging features are the cool ones, the ones that I want to talk about. So as you know, we've already spoken a bit about DevSecOps, non-security automation, LLM integrations. But two of them, I think, are actually more interesting in terms of where the space is going. So it's event ingestion and filtering, which has, at least in the early days, been wholly the responsibility of SIEM. And then SOAR was just kind of bolted on top of that. But today, SOARs can ingest logs and API calls and login attempts and stuff like that by itself, and then it can decide what to do with them. So there is a decoupling from SIEM. It's not dependent on SIEM anymore. And on the other hand, you also have security data lake integrations like the AWS security data lake, where you can just throw in all your logs and then call them whenever you need to. And having those two together gets you in the realm of SIEM. So that means that if you are, and I'm just speaking theoretically here, if you are a smaller company that does not have a SIEM in place at the moment, you have the opportunity of looking at SOAR tools that do well on those two features, that can ingest whatever logs your infrastructure is producing, store them in a data lake, and then call them you can do threat hunting through them. You can do correlations with the data that's stored in the security data lake, such that you can bypass having to deploy a full SIEM product. Take this with a grain of salt. It is definitely something that you should explore. But the benefit comparing to going, for example, for an open source SIEM is that you get all the automation stuff. So everything that SOAR can do, you get that out of the box, right? Including integrations and everything like that. So it can be like a lightweight SIEM enhanced.
Yeah, and I think that's such a key difference between the next generation of SOAR platforms and legacy SOAR, where I think with legacy SOAR it was fairly easy to saturate the entire automation pipeline. Whereas I was chatting with our engineering team recently, and they were telling me that Tynes is now processing something like 1 billion workflows per week just for our cloud customers. So the scale definitely makes a difference, just in terms of what you actually need versus what you can maybe get away with without worrying that you're gonna tip over your SOAR platform. Yeah, these are, I think these make a lot of sense as features to evaluate when looking at a SOAR platform. And, not to toot our own horn, but Tynes was pretty proud to be named a leader and outperformer in the Radar report. So we'd love to hear, Andrew, like what does an outperformer mean?
So outperformer means that we expect this vendor in future iterations of the report to be closer to the standard than non-outperformers. And as we go from one version to the other, I make the report harder, essentially. So if you look at version 1 of SOAR, it is nothing compared to this one. I try to look for all the obscure features that you might need with SOAR. For example, like can the tool differentiate between TLS 1.2 and TLS 1.3? Yes, very good. Scores higher than otherwise. So as time goes on and we refine the report and we look for emerging features that we then translate into key features as time passes and stuff like that, we expect outperformers to either maintain their position in a Radar report with higher stakes or go more towards the center. Now, no vendor is ever going to reach the center. That's kind of the point of the report, and it's the reason why I'm making it so difficult, because I don't like when everybody scores well on everything and there's no differentiation. So I want to make it as differentiated as possible. So we expect Tynes to be in the next iterations of the report, at least in the same place as they are right now.
Awesome. Well, we are absolutely thrilled and really excited about being named both a leader and an outperformer in the report. And I think this year we were the only vendor to get a score of 4 or 5 in all the evaluated categories. But I know we've got our work cut out for us, and we'll have to continue shipping in order to maintain that bar. I think adversaries get more sophisticated every year. The security environment gets tougher every year. And I love the fact that you're continuing to just raise the bar for security vendors, because that's what we need to do. And our customers deserve that to make sure that we're able to provide those capabilities to meet where the ecosystem is at. Awesome. Well, that is most of what we had to cover. And, for the folks in the audience, I would love to hear from you now. If you have questions and you haven't asked them already, would love to have you drop those in the chat. And we'll do our best to answer them with the time we have left. So let's see. We have, to start things off, a question from Dane Enquist, which is, what tends to be the lowest hanging fruit for a SOAR workflow? I'm curious where a customer might start and get the most value. It's a great question, Dane, and I think it's going to be a little different for every single organization, mostly because everybody has different pain points as they're starting off on their automation journey. This is more qualitative than quantitative, but if there's a workflow that you do every day and it just makes you mad, honestly, that's one of the ones that I would look at as a candidate. Just purely for quality of life, right? Like, you want to be working more efficiently, you want to be working faster, but also, just feeling like you're, not doing this, hitting the same button every single day, and feeling engaged, and that you're free to go work on the more engaging stuff also really matters. A lot of what we see folks start with automating are some of the the questions to security, where maybe somebody reports a phishing email or what have you, as well as use cases where ambiguous activity is occurring. For example, if somebody has an anomalous login, that might legitimately be them, or it might be an attacker, and the only way to find out is to actually go reach out to that person, ask them if the activity was them, so on and so forth. It's kind of what I call the was this you problem. That's something that can be very painstaking for an analyst. But if you have an automation that's automatically sending this person, an MFA challenge that they have to pass, that they, can only do if they're in possession of a hardware token, for example, all of a sudden that workflow gets way easier for humans. So things like that are where I often see folks start. Andrew, I don't know if you've, in chatting with folks, heard of other use cases that seem like low-hanging fruit, or or anything like that.
So the lowest hanging fruit, I think that the sweetest fruit, if you will, is identity. So identity is by far the biggest attack vector. It's the one where you've got the human element involved. All phishing attacks kind of go through identity. You've got a bunch of tools like ITDR, identity threat detection and response, and so on, that deals specifically with the challenges for securing identities. So if you can use SOAR to design workflows that revolve around identity, revoking access upon anomalous behavior, as Matt mentioned, actually sending an email or a Slack message to somebody to confirm it's them, imposing step-up authentication if, like, for example, the MFA tool you're using does not support that natively. You've got a lot of stuff to do with identity, and it's likely going to take care of most kind of low complexity attacks that you can deal with.
Absolutely. Got a question here, which is directed at me. Matt, from your perspective as a security leader, what are the biggest challenges teams face today when it comes to adopting and effectively using SOAR platforms? I think two of the things that can make life a little harder, regardless of what type of automation you're implementing, is trying to bite off more than you can chew at once, and not tying your automation goals to the overall metrics and KPIs that matter for your cybersecurity program. I think there's a real need to crawl, walk, run when it comes to automation, right? If you try to start with your most complicated set of workflows, it's going to take you so long to fully automate everything end to end. And by then, things may have evolved. Where we see folks be more successful is starting with bite-sized iteration, right? And this is something that we try to make very easy with Tines, where you can start with a simple workflow. That workflow can actually be called from another workflow. And by the time you've started implementing automation across all these small pieces, more and more folks on the team are going to be comfortable doing it, and you can start tying all these puzzle pieces together into some very sophisticated stuff. So I think again, not biting off more than you can chew, but also again, when choosing what to automate, there's the low hanging fruit, but also as you mature your automation program, setting automation goals that actually map to what matters for what you report out to the business, right? And at the end of the day, the security team's job is to make sure that the business can operate. And so those metrics around incident response efficiency and automation being able to implement some of those metrics are help with prioritizing some of the more important pieces of work, in my view. Now, Andrew, got a question for you. In your research for the GigaOm SOAR report, what were some of the trends that you observed that shape kind of the future of the SOAR market?
Right. So I am going to say it's the preeminence of SOAR vendors actually entering the market. And I'm going to say that, as you know, there have been many acquisitions in the space since 2019 and about 2022. I can name at least 6 acquisitions. Big players acquiring point solution SOARs, which is the reason for why I actually made that bucket list, not bucket list, the categorizations about pure play SOAR vendors, cross portfolio players, and so on. There have been other analysts, namely Forrester. They have said SOAR cannot live standalone and is going to be consumed by the same market. But as I've been writing these, I just come across more vendors. I think from last year to this year, I added 5 new vendors. And since then, I've started posting some content around this online. I've had 3 more vendors reaching out to me, and they are point solution SOARs. So I don't think it can be consumed just because of the sheer size of vendors that there are in the space. Most of them, having entered the market recently, they don't have any of those legacy challenges either. So they have learned from what the Misto did back in 2015, and now are building on top of that. I expect the next iteration of the radar to have even more standalone SOAR vendors. They might not call themselves that anymore, but at heart, they're still going to do security, automation, orchestration, and response with a sprinkle of AI, likely.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question from Sean. Compared to other SOAR vendors, is Tines more tailored to enterprise, mid-market, or smaller organizations? What's your bread and butter in the market? I think the easy answer is all of the above. But I think it's worth talking about why I think the answer is all of the above. Tines, and you can go on our website today and sort of take a look at the logos that we have on the website and some of the case studies that we've done. There is a huge range of organizations that are using Tines. And part of that is because we've taken a very deliberate strategy to make Tines what I would say is like almost a reverse onion of complexity and configurability, right? Where it starts off very, very simple on the surface. And the more layers you peel away, the more you find that you can make Tines do exactly what you want it to do at sort of any different scale or size of organization, any sort of workload size. This gives us the ability to say, whether you're a small MSSP, whether you are a federal agency, whether you're a Fortune 500 enterprise, there is a a flavor of tines that's going to be useful in those scenarios. We also take pride in the fact that tines can deploy in some of the most demanding security environments on the planet, with the ability to do a complete air-gapped, self-hosted tines deployment, or a simple cloud deployment, right? And so I think our approach from day one has very much been, everybody deserves the chance to delegate some of their toil to automation so they can focus on their most important work, and that's going to look different at different size organizations. So I think that's why again, the answer of all of the above is maybe a little bit of a cop out, but I do actually believe that that's something that we're able to accommodate.
Yeah, based on the information that I have, I can attest to that. Full disclosure, I haven't deployed Tines, in an enterprise. I'm not affiliated or anything like that. But I can say, when I first started looking at Tines, and I believe this might have been 2022, besides the company being smaller there and perhaps the branding, I associate Tines with small to medium enterprises. And then as I spoke with you over the years and asked about scalability, which is one of the non-functional requirements that we evaluate, that thing can go up. And it can do with, for example, as you mentioned, self-hosted being a very big one for large enterprises who want especially security stuff to be run in their own environments. So being able to self-host, then horizontal scalability, and making sure that, for example, you've got a virtual appliance deployment model, which means you can either have like a Docker container and you can orchestrate that with Kubernetes to make sure that it scales up and down as you need. And then you can also have your cloud deployments, which whenever they are managed by the vendor, all that built-in auto scalability is as well managed by the vendor. Multi-tenancy, as mentioned, a very big one, especially important for large organization. If you are a multinational and you've got different opcos, like let's say somebody in Germany, somebody in the US, and you want them to be on separate tenants, you can do that only if the solution is multi-tenant.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, this brings us to just about the end of the conversation. I know there's a number of other questions in the chat here, and apologies that we haven't been able to get to all of them. But feel free to reach out to Tines. We're happy to chat directly and answer those questions, and feel free to take the Tines Community Edition platform for a spin as well. Andrew, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I really loved this conversation and really appreciate all your perspectives. For those of you who maybe haven't been able to join the whole chat live, again, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar as well as some other little goodies as well. So thank you again, everyone. Appreciate you hopping on, appreciate the questions, and we will see you on the next Tines webinar.